Today we are very excited because we have a special guest who is a feature film director that Nick and I both really like very, very much. And his name is Marcus Nispel. And Marcus started his career like commercials and music video world before getting into the genre film that he's in now. And he was tapped by Michael Bay to direct the 2003 reboot of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which provided to be a big hit at the box office. He followed up with the Martin Scorsese-produced TV project Frankenstein in 2004, the Viking adventure Pathfinder in 2007, the reboot of Friday the 13th in 2009, and an update of Conan the Barbarian in 2011, and most recently the horror thriller Exeter starring Stephen Lang, which premieres this month exclusively on DirecTV before hitting theaters in August. Welcome to the show, Marcus. We're so happy you could join us.
Hey, thanks. Thanks for having me.
No problem. And of course, I'm joined by my co-founder and co-host, Nick. Nick, how's it going? Sorry, man, I lost you. I was too excited to do the introduction.
No, I'm doing good, and good to be here as always, and very excited to have Marcus on the show. Thanks for coming on the show, Marcus.
My pleasure.
Yeah, Nick finally let me introduce a guest, so it was very exciting for me to...
Oh, you normally don't get to do that?
No, normally he shuns me, and I get to ask like maybe one or two questions. I'm kidding, kind of. I'm joking. Okay, let me just start with, so your background, when I was looking you up, I noticed, of course you came from the music video world, and I saw that you directed a George Michael music video.
That's right. By the way, whatever you do, don't look me up.
Okay. And coincidentally, I love George Michael, and I have the DVD, George Michael 25, that your music video is on there.
Yeah.
Killer, Papa Was a Rolling Stone.
Yep.
How did I have to ask you, like, how did that come about? Because, like, I seriously love George Michael, man. I think he's fantastic.
Well, usually when people call me, they have a problem to solve, in particular in commercials or music videos. And at the time, the problem was that he didn't want to be in his own videos, or couldn't be in his own videos, even for legal reasons. So you had to come up with something. It's kind of like making a movie without a storyline, which I later specialized in. You see, something has to hold it all together, right? So he couldn't be in it, and so I kind of like focused on the lyrics, and we sort of like I think acknowledged like that music videos are really commercials for CDs. And, sort of played with advertising logos and commercials, and put them sort of into the grunge culture, which was hip at the time.
Right. Yeah, no, I wasn't as familiar with the music video. I think I'd seen it probably a long time ago, but I popped my DVD out and I watched it, and I thought it was... When I was watching it, I was like, of course it was directed by you, because I just got done watching Conan the remake, and then Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It was very funny that I was able to put context into it. It's very stylized, like your work is. It's very dark. The aesthetic met the aesthetic of the two previous films that I watched, and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic.
Thank you.
I really, really enjoyed it. So your first film, or I should say the first Hollywood film, how did you get involved with the remake of Texas Chainsaw Massacre?
It's actually a funny story because, you see, I was like, for the longest time wondering what my first movie would be, and coming from Germany, the sort of like land of the auteur filmmakers, or Europe in general, I went like, well, it's got to be original. It will not be a remake. It will not be a horror movie, and essentially already lingered in limbo for years because kind of at the time that was expected. Look, Fincher had to do an Alien movie first, like it was sort of, right. How you got your breakthrough, and in a way unfair to an entire generation of filmmakers before somebody like Roman Polanski would make Knife in the Water, right? And then ultimately he would get to do his big Hollywood movie. Now you have to do your big Hollywood franchise first, and if you do really well, you might get a little independent movie under your belt after that, right? Like a reward. So
right.
One of my oldest friends and my cinematographer, Daniel Pearl, Daniel DP'd the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre straight out of film school. And when I told him about the travesty that they wanted to make a remake, he suddenly went, well, you got to direct it. And I go like, well, why me? And he says, well, because you will hire me and I get to do the same movie twice. No DP ever shot the same movie twice. And he says, one at the beginning of my career and the other one at the end of my career. And so I thought that was good enough reason, you know, getting my buddy into the Guinness Book of World Records.
And that had to be hugely exciting for him to be, you know, at the forefront of something, you know, at that point. That was, 12 years ago? So you're looking, you know, 30 years before, something like that, you know, 25, 30 years before. They make such an iconic film, and then to get the sensibility of a Michael Bay and then obviously the, you know, your visual style added in for the remake. You guys did, you know, because I've seen the original, I've seen your remake a couple times. You know, you guys did exactly what, you know, a good remake should do, is take the core material, update it for the times, and, you know, express something sort of different. My whole feeling is you should never be too, you should never be too worried about having to replicate everything all the time. And that was probably a really exciting thing for Pearl, to be able to go back to material that made him famous and, you know, kicked off what would become a huge thing for him.
Well, you know, if you do a remake, you don't really want to do it exactly the same way again. We certainly didn't, maybe to a fault. But, you know, I have this sort of rule of thumb is, if you do it, you sit down with a bunch of people to whom the material really matters a lot. The fans, the producers, the people that were originally involved with it. And you sit down and you talk about what it is that you think is important in that franchise or in that piece of original material, even if it's a newspaper article or a book or a comic book. And as you sit and as you talk, there are going to be 10 points that completely overlap. And those points have to be in it. And everything else must change. You know, I wasn't interested in doing something like Psycho, where you do like shot by shot. You know,
right.
That was certainly not our idea for a remake. And look, if you go into business with Michael Bay, you know what you're in for. You know, it's going to be somewhat action in disguise, right? It's sort of action-fied, exactly, if that's a word. And in a way, I suppose it made a crossover.
Well, I was just going to say, did you have any? Now it's like you're in the commercial and music video world, and you're clearly a success, and you've got momentum, and you're working with great companies and great artists. And then here comes Michael Bay, who's obviously a force, and says, you know, let's get you to do this film. Did you feel any sort of like trepidation about taking on such classic, iconic material with your first movie? Because, you know, as everyone says, the first movie is so important. You want it to be a hit. You want it to be well received. What was the mental thought that you had, you know, should I take this on or could I take it on?
Well, I didn't have fear of the thrash, because, you see, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre in Germany, where I'm from, was not R-rated, or X-rated, it was not allowed. You were just not allowed to see it. They just thought it was so off the scale. And because of that, I knew of its infamy, but I didn't grow up with the same reverence as somebody who saw it for the first time in the movie theaters, probably playing next to a screen where they had a Doris Day Rock Hudson comedy, right? So that got to hit you like a freight train, and I never had that experience. And second of all, as I said, to me it was sort of like a glorified prank. You see, I never saw an audience watch my stuff. You do a music video, you do a commercial, you pat each other on the shoulder and you say you made great art. And the reality is that people probably when it airs, get up and fix himself a grilled cheese sandwich or take a leak, right? So when you watch a movie of this sort and you see people react like they only do with a comedy or horror, where they howl and laugh and jump out of the seats and scream, it's a very gratifying experience after over 2,000 2,000 commercials and 200 something music videos, where you never see your audience. So those two things made me venture into something I probably shouldn't have done, because the moment I did, I read the bloggers, right? This was sort of like the burgeoning of internet reviews, blogs, and the fanboys stepping forward, and you go like, oh my God, what have I gotten myself into, right? And, we were fortunate enough that we could turn it around, and now we're being accused of having started the remake frenzy. Nothing was further from what I wanted to do. In fact, I would agree with most of them. I would be, horrified if somebody would attempt remaking some of my favorite movies.
Yeah, like I told you prior, I remember I first saw this film. It was right after I got out of high school. I was in college, and I saw it as a double bill because they re-released Alien in theaters. So I was with one of my buddies, and I was like, let's go check out the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and we'll go see Alien. And that was a long night, man. And that was a freaky night. Like, honestly, I rewatched Texas Chainsaw Massacre this weekend, and then I watched it again today, and I genuinely like it a lot, and I think it is very good. You're right when you said it's very different from the original, but it has the same elements. The two things I absolutely love about the film is John Larroquette's voiceover. I think that's brilliant that was in the remake. I honestly do. I think that's fantastic. How did that come about?
Well, as I said, 10 things have to overlap, right? Hey, that's actually an interesting story, talking about seeing it with an audience, and in particular the two movies you've seen there. After my music video run, or while I was doing the music videos, I got a phone call. I had my own company in New York City, and I got a phone call from Ridley Scott. And I thought it was a prank. I said, who the fuck are you? It's like, no, it's Ridley. And I hear the accent, and I go like, gee, I think it's really him. And he talked me into joining his company. In fact, we wound up merging them. I would work through Ridley's company doing my commercials, and everybody at his company would work through my music video company to do the music videos. Anyway, when I told him when Texas Chainsaw Massacre premiered, I wanted to see it with an audience, and we wound up going to the Bridge, I think the biggest movie theater in the Los Angeles area, close to the airport. And we walked in, the movie was already running, and the guy that led us into it, he says, you know what? Don't, it plays absolutely amazing. He said 40 people over the weekend asked for assistance. I said, what does that mean? He says, well, we usually take them to the parking lot and they walk in a circle and then they usually go back in. So I was in the back because it was all sold out. And so I'm sitting with the paraplegics right, in the back left corner, and I'm right behind them. And there was one scene. We were fucking with it forever. It's when the sheriff knocks against the window of that bus, and we wanted to make sort of a fake scare out of it. And it's always like sliding the sound by, a millisecond this direction, millisecond that direction that keeps them from working or not working. And we realized if you hear the sound before you see the picture, it's much scarier. And so I want to wonder how that works on the audience. And the moment he knocks on the window, one of the paraplegics jumped out of his chair. And he stood there windmilling.
Oh, man.
There's no other redeeming value to this movie. We made a paraplegic jump out of his seat. So Ridley tells me the story of when he was going to the premiere of one of the test screenings of Alien. And he said in front of him, while they were watching, there were two deaf mutes. And while they were waiting for the movie to start, they would talk with each other. And that's how you could tell that there were deaf mutes, right? So when the chest burster scene happened, their hands were going so crazy. They were like almost knocking each other out.
Got to be one of the ultimate sights to probably ever see in a movie theater right there.
Yeah,
that's amazing.
You don't get that. You don't get that when you do a music video or a commercial. But you know what we did on this one? We went like, you know what? We're not going to let it to the bloggers to tell us if this movie is scary or not. Exeter, the latest one that we just premiered on DirecTV. So what we did is we did a screening, and we connected people to an EEG, and we tested the heart rate while they were watching the movie.
Whoever in marketing came up with that one probably got a gold star for the day. Now, and you know, we can talk about some of the other stuff, but we should probably talk about your most recent project, Exeter, a bit. This sort of brings you back to, after doing some more period-flavored, you know, action things with Pathfinder and Conan. This sort of brings you back to the horror thriller genre, which you started with Texas Chainsaw, you know, with high school kids and stuff. And Frank and I, we haven't had a chance to see it because we don't have DirecTV. And I know right now, tell everybody it's exclusive to DirecTV, and then it hits theaters in August, followed by how does the project work?
Yeah, it's a sort of a new way of releasing this, where you build sort of an awareness by bringing it out on DirecTV first. They advertise it well, you know, a whole bunch of people see it, and hopefully it churns word of mouth. Because you see, it's kind of interesting now. There was a time when you could make a movie because of a great script or because of a great studio boss. Then later it became directors, and later it became stars that people would go to the movies for. Most recently it was corporations, and now it's media platforms. And that's kind of odd, you know, how that changed, how there are different things that make things happen. And these media platforms, they're not necessarily in the mood of putting a lot of advertising in it. They expect that the movie sells itself because they have a famous director attached to it, or because they have a comic book franchise, or it's another James Bond movie or a Marvel movie. And you guys will do the job for them. So there will be an awareness, and everybody will go, and it doesn't cost them, or it won't cost them something they probably can't even afford anymore. It became so exuberantly expensive, which means all those movies that I made remakes of in today's environment as originals would not even be possible. And that's very sad, you know. So through DirecTV now, or Netflix or Amazon and all those kind of outlets, you have a chance to make a niche movie or a movie for a niche audience. This is not for everyone. I don't expect it to be for everyone, you know. You know, they get a chance to see it now.
Yeah, and that's what's so exciting, is because with these new platforms, with on demand and so many people getting in on the content game, the pictures that you want to make and the lower budgeted items that we're used to seeing in the theaters that now aren't getting the biggest push, you're still going to be able to find them if you look hard enough. And, you know, you always want, you know, Frank and I, like we've said a million times, we'll watch, you know, pretty much anything as long as it's compelling and cool and exciting. And, you know, you don't want the smaller films and the more, you know, genre specialty items to get lost. So,
and you don't want them to be compromised, and I don't want them to be compromised. This is the first movie that didn't get compromised. But trust me, as we were showing it to studios and big release companies, you know, they would look at it and they say, "Oh, it's sort of like kind of funny and it's scary. We really like that it's scary. Take the funny stuff out." Or, you know, "We really like it that it's funny. Take all the gory stuff out." And I go like, well, it's probably the same stuff they told Sam Raimi once, you know. I want it like this, right? And, you know, now you can do it uncompromised if you go this path. And that was more important for me than anything else. look, Terry Gilliam finally is getting his Don Quixote movie out, Man of La Mancha. After decades, he gets it out, and it will be on Amazon. And he said in an interview, he says, like, you know what? Everybody always watches my movies or watched my movies on VHS or DVD anyway. And if I think back, I don't think I've ever seen a Terry Gilliam movie not on VHS or DVD, maybe except Munchausen, right? And I think the same is true for a lot of movies that I've gotten involved with in the past. The originals I only knew through DVD or VHS. And this is sort of the new environment for that. It's also much harder to bootleg.
That's true, and that's something that obviously everybody is so cognizant of over the last, decade, plus, with all of the piracy and everything that goes on. And, I would have to say that, you made a comment that you felt that Exeter was your least compromised film. Tell us a little bit about Exeter and people who are going to hear about it. What's the general gist without spoiling it? And you feel like it sounded like you're very confident with this in that you got the chance to make the movie that you've wanted to make, that you set out to make.
I'm always confident in a sort of foolish kind of a way. But when the whole thing came together, Steven Schneider contacted me. Him and Jason Blum, of course, came up with this incredible success of Paranormal Activity and Insidious. And he says, look, if you can make a movie for $1 million, I find somebody to distribute it. And, when we talked about what it would be, I said, well, one thing or two things I know it's not going to be. It's not going to be a remake, and it's not going to be a found footage movie, because we respectively can be blamed for both miseries. So he asked me, what would it be? What would the story be? And I said, look, I don't know, but like the scariest movie in my book always was The Exorcist. But what I realized is whenever movies deal with exorcism, it always happens in a very distinguished family, just senators, movie star households. And I said, it never happens to us, the ones that watch these movies, right? Actually, people much younger than me. And what would happen if they go and party all night and spin the bottle and do drugs and tinker with a Ouija board or levitation, and one guy's little brother gets grabbed by the nuts by something unholy, and as they're trying to figure out what it is, well, they're still thinking it's maybe drugs. Once they get the gist of what's going on, they're nobody's fool. At that point in the typical movies with exorcisms, it always is, exorcism? Does that even exist? Isn't that from the Middle Ages? And these guys are like, fuck no. We rent the movie The Exorcist, and we do everything that Max von Sydow does on Linda Blair on Your Little Brother. So it's a do-it-yourself exorcism, an amateur hour. And we had just a great fun doing it. We had a really fun young cast, young ensemble, and, well, killed them one after the other.
In the way that you know how to do best, I'm sure. So this is because you've worked on, everything from big budgets to mid-sized budgets to low budgets. So when you get a chance to move from a massive film to a smaller film, is there the same sense of creative license that you've been able to take? And what is the, what do you see yourself enjoying one more than the other? Like if you could only do one thing?
Well, if you do a big franchise, and I'm not even saying a big budget movie, because Texas Chainsaw for production only was $2 million. So that's a small budgeted movie, right? But it's a big franchise, and there are big studios involved, and there's a big number above the line, right, of all those people involved that want to get paid ahead of time. When you do those, you're sort of a dog of many masters. And that is different if you do a small movie like Exeter. Having said that, I said, just because I'm doing a smaller budgeted movie, I'm not going to punish the audience with inferior film. And I like to report, I really know this to be true, is that its production value is, as good or shitty as anything else I've ever done before. You tell me. But and I don't think that would have been possible if I wouldn't have done several movies now and many, many commercials and many music videos and a lot of help from my friends. I got a lot of favors, to make this look the way I want it to be and keep up a certain style.
Right. To circle back from Exeter, I wanted to ask you about the Frankenstein project that you were involved in and how you got involved with Martin Scorsese.
Yes.
To make that.
Yes. In theory, I was very excited about it. I was excited about the premise because, again, you hear Frankenstein, you go like, oh, just another remake. It really is not. It is based on the premise that Kuntz came up with, who wrote the book, that when Frankenstein, the creator, created his monster, he needed lightning to jolt it awake, right? And the lightning was sort of like, in his book, God's middle finger, where God instilled it through a God-given lightning strike with the soul. So now, over the centuries, the creator keeps himself alive by killing others for body parts, later learns new tricks about genetics and whatnot, and managed to keep himself alive with the technology he pioneered, and becomes more and more a monster. The human becomes more and more a monster, and the monster discovered his humanity and is after him now. And to me, that was a good enough reason to engage. And at the time, there was no such thing as something of R-rated or horrific dark nature on television. So I thought, well, let's give that a chance. And when we did it, everybody went like, well, it is great and all, but it is so dark. Who wants to go into such a dark place every week? And you watch television now, and it became sort of like the integral part of it. So I'm very proud of it. I do believe we were really ahead of our time, but look
what Showtime's doing with Penny Dreadful now.
Yeah, absolutely.
They spun off that sort of milieu into a dark weekly television show. I think it's exciting to get you have Michael Bay calling you, and then you hear from Martin Scorsese. So it's like you have these two amazingly different cinematic voices that have become iconic in their very own ways over the course of their careers. So I think that sort of speaks to how people perceive you, I think. Here's a guy with a great style and a great sensibility, but also here's a guy that is interested in bringing something new to the table with these classic properties.
I believe they just don't know how to figure me out, and in a way, I think they believe that I can sort of like upgrade their product. These were all projects that people didn't have much faith in originally or over the decades. I know for Texas Chainsaw Massacre, their loftiest expectation was sort of like maybe 20 million. So once this went over $100 million, everybody went like, gee, this is good business.
When you, how did something, because it's not a remake or a reimagining of something, in the really popular sense of the term, I know that there's material that Pathfinder was loosely based on. How did something like Pathfinder come about, considering that it feels to me like sort of maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, maybe your most, that I've seen short of Exeter, your most personal film in terms of something that feels like a, just a very unique vision of something. How did that project get born in between updating these, huge properties?
Well, a friend of mine turned me on to it a long, long, long time ago. And it was stuck in my head a little bit, sort of like a simple story of survival and revenge. And to me, that's always a good reason to make a movie. Because you see, we sit in square rooms and we look at square boxes. And what all my movies have in common is trying to give you somewhat of a tribal organic experience, watch people that actually still got dirt under their fingernails. I'm an old Boy Scout, so I'm drawn to anything survival, anything primordial or primal. And the original Norwegian movie Pathfinder seemed to be a good leaping off point. But then because I was always excited about Vikings, when I thought about Vikings and the fact that they probably made it all the way to Vinland, all the way to America, well, they would have encountered natives. And I thought, let's turn that into a movie. Now, at the time, I always wanted to make a Conan movie, and I liked the license you can take with a comic book franchise. So we decided, you know what, this is not going to be History Channel kind of stuff. We're going to make a comic book and release a movie together with that comic book I'm very proud of. And actually, I'm very proud of Pathfinder. So that sort of like was a starting point. Now, Texas Chainsaw Massacre just came out, and it did well at the box office. And for a week before Elf kicked our ass at the box office, I could meet anybody I wanted to meet in Hollywood. And I said, I want to meet Mike Medavoy, because Mike Medavoy did all of my favorite movies over 10, 20 years at my favorite studio during my favorite time for movies in the 70s at United Artists. And I said, I want to meet him. So a meeting was arranged. We're having breakfast together. And I want to tell him about Pathfinder. And he says, wait, I want to tell you about something I have here. I didn't tell him what I wanted to talk to him about. And he says, it plays in an ice age. It is in the future. And one kid gets his ass kicked by marauders. He takes refuge at another tribe, and the marauders are about to catch up with them there. And now he has to defend that tribe. And I said, Mike, that's a story of Pathfinder. He says, yeah, I have the rights. I said, you must be kidding me, because that's what I wanted to talk to you about. I swear to God, I'm not making this up.
Wow.
So he could hardly believe it. He says, what's your take? So I tell him about Vikings and natives, and he trashed his 6 drafts that moment, and he says, let's do that. And that was my encounter with Mike Medavoy. And then, a year later, we did Pathfinder.
That's amazing.
It's an amazing story. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's something your heart.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, your heart must have dropped out of your chest there, eating breakfast with Mike Medavoy and having you guys be on the same page without even knowing it. And then he likes it, and then you get a chance, because I'm really curious about it, because it feels like such a huge movie, and I can only go off of what I read online about how much it costs to make and how long it took to make. You had I said it in my review, there's sort of like this balance of, Last of the Mohicans and, all of these great adventure films, tied into one. And I just want to know how you were able to make a film from what appears to be like in the mid-budgeted range look so huge and epic.
Well,
and
first of all, in almost all movies that I've done, because I do pride myself with a decent production value, they usually make the prices sound much bigger than they were. That movie did not have more than $20 million to it. So whatever it says on the internet that it's 50 or 60, that's just not the truth. But I said, you know what? I don't need much more, because I like the idea. Well, first of all, I had the arrogance of just having grossed over $100 million with a $2 million investment on Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which didn't have gigantic stars in it, but it was a known franchise. But I thought maybe lightning could strike twice, and essentially I was intrigued in mounting this like a Rambo story, right? A Rambo story in period or epic disguise, sort of a mini epic, if you may. Nobody really does that. I read your review, and actually one of the movies that I had in mind more than anything else that you just mentioned was Black Robe, a movie that I really immensely enjoyed. And that's sort of how we went out. I was later that the studio actually asked for a bunch of changes to be made. One of the big changes was to not cast what was originally written for a 16-year-old. I wanted to do it with a teenager and put a man in instead. And at the time, it seemed like in order to keep, the gravy train going, it seemed like a little concession. But the whole idea really is about who am I and where do I belong? And if you're in your 50s and your 40s and you haven't figured that out, it just doesn't play so well. So that was, in a way, a big sacrifice in hindsight. The other thing is, in the last minute, we were asked to make it a PG-13 movie. And then later, when it was tested, and the audience went like, dude, this is a Viking movie, worth of blood. Then suddenly they said, well, add some squibs. But you see, if you are mounting something PG-13, it is not just a difference between a bunch of cutaway scenes or squibs that makes an R-rated movie. You just go about it differently, So that was sort of a big blow as well. You make small little sacrifices in order to be a good boy, but some of them are not as small as you might think at the time. So it wasn't without compromise. I should add to it all compromise I was willing to take at the time.
So then after Pathfinder, how did Conan come about?
Well, Pathfinder was a movie I wanted John Milius to write. John got busy, and Lita Kalogridis then became the writer on it. But we had several meetings, and John and me became really good friends. Now, John could write just about anything, and I would die to direct it. He's like my kind of a guy. In fact, I remember when I was a kid, I read a review. I was a Star Wars kid. Conan came out soon after. And I read a review in Time magazine, I think it was, and it said, Milius's Conan, Star Wars by a sociopath. And I went like, one day I want somebody to say that about something I do. It was just my idea of a good time, right? And so we became friendly, and he says, look, you should make my Conan, and showed me a script. I got super excited about it. At the time, it was at Warner's. And then it moved over to Millennium, and it became a whole different script. And so by default, I wound up doing that Conan then.
Yeah, because I just, like I told you earlier, I just bought the Blu-ray, and I love the original. I don't care for the sequel, but I think the original one is, and it's an iconic film.
Yeah.
So when I put the Blu-ray in, I was wary of it to see how it turned out. But I guess I should have known, because how much I enjoyed the Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake, and then Conan, I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I spoke to you earlier about it, but Stephen Lang is like the greatest thing ever in that fucking movie. I was waiting the whole time, and I didn't even know that Morgan Freeman was the narrator.
That is true, and Morgan narrated my Pathfinder trailer as well. Yeah,
I was like, holy shit! I popped it in, and Morgan Freeman's voice comes up, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I didn't read anything about it on purpose, because I just wanted to go in blind. I mean, I knew Jason Momoa was Conan, and I was looking forward to that because I loved him in Game of Thrones, and then Bullet to the Head, I thought he was really good into the Stallone vehicle. So Ron Perlman shows up as the father. I thought it was awesome. I thought maybe Stephen Lang was going to play the dad, because I don't understand how Stephen Lang became the villain, because generally when the way I look at it, when you make films like this, you need like the heavy actor,
right,
to play the villain. Like make somebody like Mickey Rourke at the time.
Yeah.
He would be the villain. He's coming off of The Wrestler. He's doing a bunch of Hollywood stuff. So when Stephen Lang, when I found out Ron Perlman's the dad, and then I knew Stephen Lang had to be the villain, so I'm watching it the whole time, and I'm just waiting, because I don't know. The first thing I probably ever noticed him in was Manhunter, and then Tombstone. And then when I was watching a bunch of stuff like Death of a Salesman and Crime Story, and I started watching all this stuff as I got older, I noticed the common thread of Stephen Lang being in all these things I liked. And I always liked his performance. So when he shows up as the villain, it was like the greatest fucking thing I've ever seen. I mean, it was fantastic.
Well, you got right at the core of it, because the reason why the rugged guys are part of this Conan world is they're Sumerians, and Sumerians are really bad guys, being the heroes in that kind of a franchise. And you see, when I thought about Conan, I went like, why do I want to make an epic? Because I really don't like epics all that much. I mean, I watched them, and I tried to figure out, why do I not like epics? Because usually I like all that big visual stuff. And I realized that epics, were invented by Cecil B. DeMille. Cecil B. DeMille tried to get people into movie houses, and the Bible Belt would not go because they thought of them as unmoral places with loose women and gunslingers. We're not going, right? Now, when Cecil B. DeMille did his movies, his Bible-informed movies, people suddenly came in drones, and literally Hollywood rediscovered that when Mel Gibson did The Passion of the Christ, right? But it became a real staple, and I went like, well, that's not Conan. Conan is the opposite of that. Conan is immoral, rugged kind of a guy. He's no Prince Valiant. Well, I guess that's why I like it. So I stopped looking at American epics or American-made epics, and I started to look at Asian epics, Asian kind of films. And in a way, Conan was much more informed by that than anything else, including the music. It didn't have that sort of Milos Raza kind of big grandness to it. It had more like world music to it, like the way you would see it in foreign epics. It's a very compromised movie, and the worst thing for me is to admit to criticism that I would actually agree with, where I myself stood up at some point and say, we should not do this, or that is wrong. But then as a team player, I had to go along with it. But the biggest thing that I got flack for, the choice of Jason Momoa, is actually the one thing I still stand by. Some of the reviews that I read were, especially bloggers coming down on Jason, sounded like downright something out of the Aryan Youth Handbook. Why is he not blonde and blue-eyed? You know what? Because now he's dark-haired and has brown eyes. That's why. And my kids, my wife is African American. My kids come in all shades, and I wanted to do something. An ethnic superhero, and he's a superhero the way I like him. I don't like, or I'm not into sci-fi or fantastic superheroes. I like them reality ground. I like a Tarzan, I like a Conan, I like a Jason, I like a Leatherface. These are guys that could really exist.
Right.
It's slightly overdrawn. There's a comic book sensibility to it, and that's where I settled.
Right. Well, I mean, he's going to be Aquaman now.
That is true.
So I wonder what all the haters are going to be saying about him as Aquaman. I haven't kept up on any of that, but I'm looking forward to him as Aquaman. But yeah, I mean, Conan was great. And I guess when I think about it, after I was gushing about Stephen Lang and how great he is in the film, perhaps his performance in Avatar propelled him towards the villain, because he's great in Avatar. Yeah. I mean, that movie's great on its own scale. Technically, but he's my favorite part of the movie of Avatar. I mean, he is. He's my favorite part of the movie. He's awesome.
Well, you get to see him again in Exeter. He was my.
I know.
Saint, he was my patron saint. You do this movie, you need a grown up in it, and what's really great about him is if he plays a good guy or a bad guy, he brings a lot of gravitas.
Right, yeah. I mean...
Sorry to interrupt. Do you think Stephen Lang will be your calling card actor for a little while? Do you hope to work with him again?
He's like a brother at this point, and he also can help you to make a movie made now. So in Exeter, he's what we call an essential part to the movie, and he really did me a huge favor showing up at this little film set that we had there. I remember I had dinner with him. I had dinner with him, and I told him about it. And I told him how little money we had to make it. And he was like, well, he says, I never say no. And I was like, man, I shouldn't have told him. He'll never come now.
That's amazing. That's great. Yeah. That's one of the things that got me excited the most when I knew you're doing Exeter and I watched the trailer, and of course Stephen Lang's in it, and of course I'm going to see it in theaters whenever it gets to Chicago. I can't even wait to experience the next film that the two of you are doing.
Exeter, yes.
Yeah, I'm so excited for that.
Thank you.
I can't even wait. Go ahead, Nick. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. What I was going to ask sort of involves, Stephen Lang, and like you had mentioned something about how you were a fan of the United Artists movies from the 70s, and Stephen Lang has this like great gritty character actor persona, and you'd mentioned that you liked movies from the 70s. What are some of your favorite films, and who were some of your inspirations? I always love to know this sort of stuff because it seems from online, from the conversations that we've all had, and you have a very eclectic taste for what you like.
Yeah, you know what? There are movies I like to watch, and there are movies I like to make. Right? The movies I like to make are movies, as I said before, that give you a visceral experience, that really put you out there. I don't know what it's like to be in Vietnam, but I watched Apocalypse Now, and I got a pretty good idea, I don't know what it's like to be part of an exorcism, but I watched The Exorcist, and it really put me there. For those 2 hours, I believed in the devil, right? There are some movies that just put you there, and those are some of the movies I like the most. Having said that, I look at movies from the 70s now and I almost love them all somehow, some for nostalgic reasons, some because it was done so uncompromising. And we all know why they were so uncompromising, right? How auteurs and directors for a while got to run the show. And Mike was always somebody who believed in the auteur and the director more than anything else. For him, the director was always what made him excited in doing a movie. So, it was a great place to settle. But I want to tell you a little bit about how I grew up, and that maybe answers your original questions about the remakes. I was a kid in Germany, and at the time that I started to go to movie theaters throughout the 70s and early 80s, when a movie got released in America, it took literally almost a year till it would come out in Germany. So while you guys would be in Star Wars fever, I would have the bed sheets, I would have the lunchbox, I would have the toys, I would have read the Mad Magazine spoof, the write-ups, I would act it out in my treehouse. And a year later, I would get to see the movie. So we were so amped, I can't even tell you, because for a year, we lived a complete fantasy. And sometimes we would see the movies, and our wildest imagination was so superseded by them, it would just blow us away. And sometimes we would watch them, and it was like nothing like we had in mind. We were almost like disappointed. But without any of that judgment, when I was drawn to do remakes, it was making the vision I had when I played it in the sandbox, when I played it in the treehouse. It was not the vision I had after seeing it. It was by what I thought it would be in that year that got my fantasy going. So I never thought of them as remakes. I thought of it as the movie I made in my head when I was waiting for it. And as such, I found they were a very different exercise than, for example, Star Trek, the first Star Trek remake. I was absolutely floored. I thought it was so incredible because what a fine line to get slammed trying to recreate Spock. And he succeeded, right? That's an art in itself. But that is not what I set out to do. I did not want to do a Arnold lookalike contest. I wouldn't have presumed it, on something like Conan. I did not want it to be a bodybuilding contest either. And yet, I disagree with those that say, well, that's not Robert E. Howard. I knew Robert E. Howard. That is not Robert E. Howard's Conan. I looked at the Robert E. Howard books, and I looked at their covers, and their Conan looks like Dean Martin. With a sword this big, right? So I went like, well, no, that's not your Robert E. Howard. Look at the books again, right? So, we knew it needed to be something new, and it wouldn't be any of that. And yet he had to personify something. And what I found out is it is doable to remake a storyline, a franchise. It is very hard to recreate a character. You can't recreate Atticus from To Kill the Mockingbird. You can't do that anymore, right? And probably you can't recreate Conan. That's a really, really hard thing to do. You can put a hockey mask on somebody who looks like a UPS man, So yeah, you can do that perhaps, right? But it's very, very hard to recreate a personality, and our consciousness over the years shifted, from whatever we read about in Robert E. Howard books to Arnold Schwarzenegger, and probably even Jason left somewhat of a mark that changes our perception of who that character is that we love so much from decade to decade to decade.
Yeah, and that was, we didn't get a chance to touch on that. You also had a chance to put your spin on Friday the 13th, which, again, after doing something like Texas Chainsaw, taking on another major franchise in the realm of horror, cinematic horror, that must have been a dream come true for somebody, like you to put your modern touch on that.
Well, again, my approach to it was very different because I'm, as I said earlier, an old Boy Scout. So we would sit at the campfire, tell each other scary stories, tell each other Jason stories without even having seen it yet. You know how many movies I knew through Mad Magazine or through stories at campfires before I even was allowed to see the original, right? Because I was a kid. So it lives in or grows or festers in your fantasy. And that's probably to a fault. There's maybe somebody who became somewhat of an academic when it comes to these Jason kind of movies. And I never had that approach. For me, it was much more about, an overall culture rather than trying to mimic or imitate something. You ask yourself, what is it about these movies? I mean, we're not talking about Lawrence of Arabia or Citizen Kane here, but what is it about those movies that makes people want to see them again and again? Prequels, sequels, remakes, buy the toys, play with them, exhibit them, not even take them out of the box, collect them, dress up as such as for Halloween, right? What is that? And I realized it when I sat with the writers, in both cases, Texas Chainsaw and Friday the 13th, and in all reverence, they never refer to Jason or Leatherface as the villain. They always called him our anti-hero. And the villain was the asshole blonde kid, the jock that wouldn't collaborate, right? So I suddenly realized that there's actually an incredible amount of underdog identification with those characters that I wasn't aware of, when I was into them. When you get your ass kicked in school or didn't get invited to the party that all the, jocks go to and the cheerleader types and so on. You feel sort of ostracized. I was into art, and I wanted to draw and I wanted to be a cartoonist for Mad Magazine, and I was in a school where, the pastime was to go to the railroad tracks, get shit-faced and kick the ass of Turkish kids, And that just wasn't my scene, So I felt very much like an outsider and could relate to those outsider stories.
And given that you've had a chance now, and I know that sometimes you can't talk about, stuff that's too far off in the horizon, but you've gone back to sort of the smaller teen-oriented horror thriller with Exeter, and we saw obviously in the trades not too long ago that you've got a very cool sounding like sea monster film, which sounds like it hasn't been done in a real long time on a big scale, and Can you tell us a little bit about that at all?
Yeah.
I know maybe it's a little early, but it's very intriguing.
Yes. Well, Johanny Nurmi, mutual friend of ours, he was somebody I actually met through Facebook. We would realize that we liked all the same movies, and so we talk a lot about them. In particular, Alien. And Johanny then asked me, and he says, well, we should really put something on paper like it. And it's so obscure. I mean, we ultimately would Skype like we're Skyping now, and it would be daytime and hot here, and would be nighttime and snow over there at the Arctic Circle where he lives, right? I mean, that's the beauty of Skype and Facebook. And we would sit there for hours trying to, hatch out the story. And I told him that for me, a very interesting aspect, a very interesting starting point would be an Alien kind of a story where you're stuck with something, with a monster, but here down to earth, actually on water, where also nobody can hear you scream, on a boat in the middle of nowhere, right on the ocean. And there's a German legend of the Klabautermann, which is a poltergeist that works on boats. And he has a very strange code of justice. And if you cross him the wrong way, everybody dies. So that's where it started. And then we tried to come up with a really good story, a dramatic story, a story about a family with real characters, not just the kill list. And I'm really happy about how it shaped up. Everybody seems to like the idea to, again, have a monster. I don't think a monster movie has been done in a long time. We have vampires now. We had
zombies and everything, right?
They all look pretty now. I don't know the last time I've seen really a terrifying, iconic monster. And there's a old movie that maybe you guys would know. It was a Fulci movie. In Europe, it was called Zombie with an I. And if you remember it, in it there was actually a zombie that could function underwater. And, he could swim, he could grab you from below. It was sort of like the perfect mix between Jaws and a zombie. And there was a scene where he kills a shark, right? It sort of stuck in my head. I went you know what? This is something the Klabautermann could do.
Well, I know
that's great.
Frank,
real
Frank,
quick, I got to give a shout out to Johanny. I got to give a shout out to Johanny because he's the one that connected us with you, and without that, we probably never would have spoken. And this has just been a fantastic conversation. This has just been unbelievable. This is great. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, this was great. Sorry, Nick. Go ahead. I just wanted to give Johanny a shout out. And
of course. I was just going to say, you and I now know how to pronounce his name because Marcus was so kind enough. We weren't sure if the J was silent and it was more like a Juhani or if it was a straight up Juhani. So now we know.
He's Juani.
Yeah, I've been wondering, so now thank you for telling us, and now we know. So yeah, it'll be something to look out for in the future for sure. And like you said, they're really, other than what Lake Placid, which was a monster alligator type thing, I'm really racking my brain trying to think about when the last cool monster movie or sea monster movie was, other than Pacific Rim, where they're that type of a beast, which sounds totally different from what you're doing. The monster movie genre sort of seems mildly neglected outside of your iconic Godzilla character. So something that.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I would. Your favorite what?
My favorite monsters are the most human ones. For some reason
you must have loved The Host then.
Yes. But the fact that the guy could be, sharpening his machete in the garage next door, the fact that the guy looks like he has been around once, even if he's a little bit tattered, I never subscribed that much to the to the guys in the rubber suits, with the exception of maybe the alien monster, right? Now, it's interesting when people ask me, they say like, hey, I'm sure you would like to do a science fiction movie. And I go like, well, you know what? I don't like many science fictions, but there are 2 or 3 I like. I like Alien. I like Star Wars. And they say, maybe you want to do a Western. And I go like, I don't like most Westerns, but I like McCabe and Miss Miller and I actually like Heaven's Gate. And maybe you want to do a love story. I don't like love stories really, but I like Harold and Maude. Right. So every genre has something in it that appeals to me, and usually what appeals to me is that it sort of fucks with the genre. That's sort of my idea of a good time. So a lot of the stuff I've done mixes genre. Hey, Pathfinder is Indians and Vikings, right? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it is not that you do this because you feel you're going to double your audience, like Jason meets Freddy. I wouldn't do that. It's not Alien meets Predator. I wouldn't do that. This is something that really happened, and interestingly enough, it actually doesn't double your audience. It halves it. It splits your audience, because one half says like, oh man, I wish that would be Last of the Mohicans, but that's not Last of the Mohicans. And somebody else says, well, I thought it would be like Lord of the Rings. Carl Urban is in it. It is not Lord of the Rings. I thought I didn't want it to be either. And that's where it's really hard to do something that I like to believe is original, where you mix genres or manipulate something because it doesn't fit into this film release template thinking, right? You go against that. For that reason, a lot of the stuff I've done, I didn't think of it as remake. Certainly in the case of Pathfinder, we were talking about it earlier.
Well, it's you've certainly had a very interesting career so far, and I know that we're looking forward to seeing where you go next. And I know that I can only imagine that whatever genre you do get to dip your hands in, it's always going to be something, exciting and cool. And as always, visually stimulating. I've said before, and I'll say it again, your movies carry a very, very, very slick and very just visually composed look and feel. And, I personally can't wait to see the sea monster thing. I think it's going to be really neat. So hopefully this all comes together. And the idea that you were able to collaborate with somebody on Facebook is, a further testament to the power of the internet and, how people find each other these days. And it's very, very exciting that somebody like yourself would open yourself up to speaking to people and fans online. And I know Frank and I are super excited, for all the, the chatting about movies that we get to do with you and others who open themselves up to, to fans and, to movie buffs. Listen, when Marcus Nispel is, talking about Paul Mazursky movies and Harry and Tonto and, Love Story, with Ryan O'Neal, I just get tickled. I just laugh about it. I love it. So, it goes to show that, with some people who maybe, have like you said, there's movies that you love and then there's movies that you want to make. And I think that it's exciting when, there's people that they're constantly surprising you, which is fun. So,
somebody to say, let's make a movie out of an old guy going cross country with his cat. That is true courage in a filmmaker, to rely so much in your material, in your character, right? Nothing gets blown up. No heads roll, right? It's just complete faith in story. I never had a story that I had so much faith in that I wouldn't revert to those tricks, that I'm playing. That takes an astute vision and great understanding. So to me, for that reason, people like Paul Mazursky are the most courageous filmmakers, and the studios that greenlit those movies were very, very courageous studios. They're not. Frank and I talk about this all the time. Is that you even had Dustin Hoffman come out. Was it yesterday? That article that was going around online talking about how he doesn't feel that cinema is great anymore or whatever, what have you. I would
tend to argue to a certain degree, but there's no question about it. 70s cinema was something special, and people were taking chances and getting the opportunity to make movies at, at their own speed and without a sort of a lot of, penny, bean counters looking over their shoulder and wondering what was going on all the time. Hopefully you'll get a chance to make your Harry and Tonto at some point soon. So
that's right.
Yeah. Well, what's the best thing Dustin Hoffman's done? I think the best thing Hoffman's done probably in the past 10, 15 years is Luck, the TV show that was on HBO. That was fantastic. Well, and there's no way that would have been a movie.
Well, he's talking about chances, the chance to, for example, I've been looking for the chance to make a movie that doesn't have to be 90 minutes long, because all my favorite movies have at least 10, 20 more minutes for character exposition. Who says it has to be 90 minutes? And who says it has to be shot in 10 and 20 days, And it doesn't matter if it's one of my movies or if it's a Dustin Hoffman movie. If you do something for a small audience or a niche audience, that's the world you're in. And then the line between genius and mediocrity is a very fine one. It's always amazing to see when people indeed succeed. Last year I was blown away by two movies, Whiplash and Nightcrawler, right?
Yeah.
These are movies.
They're two of the best movies of last year.
Spirit,
Yes.
In Nightcrawler, I never thought I would ever have the privilege again to watch a movie that would remind me of Taxi Driver in today's climate.
Yeah, what would we say? We said Faye Dunaway's character from Network, if she had a baby with Travis Bickle, it would have been Jake Gyllenhaal and Nightcrawler. I mean, that movie is fierce, right? And you're dead on. I mean, that movie is Taxi Driver-esque.
Yeah.
Up the ass. I mean, that film is fantastic. And you're dead on with Whiplash, too. Whiplash was fantastic. Those were two of my favorite films from last year. I own both of them, and I absolutely loved them.
And a Nightcrawler protagonist that is not necessarily likable.
Right.
Not necessarily likable.
He's a piece of shit.
Yeah, he's a despicable human being. Those two movies are definitely, I would say, two of the more, certainly Nightcrawler, very 70s inflected cinema there, and very inspired by, the anti-heroes of that time. And, Gyllenhaal is just, he's been on fire of late. That performance is just outstanding. It's a crime that he wasn't nominated for an Oscar for it, but, that happens every year. People don't get nominated for Oscars when they should, but yeah, it's those two movies were bracing in their uncompromising nature. Whiplash takes you on this ride, for just like Nightcrawler, never lets you out for pretty much close to 2 hours, and you're in it to win it the whole time. Whether you like it or not.
Nightcrawler falls into another category that I think goes even beyond just a great movie, which is, what are the movies of today that are generation defining? Like, for example, you had Jimmy Dean at his time, and he defined his generation, or later you would have somebody like a John Travolta in Saturday Night Fever, defining the 70s. There haven't been characters like that in a long time, or like Marlon Brando that defined almost, an entire era. There haven't been characters around like that in a long time. I'm not even the biggest Jake Gyllenhaal fan, but what he played in that movie, I thought, it made me pause, because I went like, wait a second, what happened here? He's not very likable, and yet you wish him well. And I realized he became, in this movie, he has, I think, an extreme appeal to a generation that feels marginalized, that feels like they feel entitled to what's on the internet, what's out in the streets. I grab it, I put it on my iPhone, I make money on it. Fuck you, right? It's sort of like this pirate mentality. The only other movie I can think of that did that was Fincher's Facebook movie, The Social Network, right?
Right.
Two characters that are actually very similar in their ruthlessness and essentially declaring war on the generation that came before them, So I thought it was. I think the movie will be remembered for more than one reason.
Yeah, you nailed it. For sure.
Yeah.
Before we wrap up and sign off, I just wanted to say, how How about you do a Star Wars standalone movie with Stephen Lang as a bounty hunter? like Dengar or something from Empire Strikes Back, and have it be a hard R.
Uh-huh.
You have to sell it hard to Disney, but that would be something that'd be amazing, right?
Yeah, like I'm not in enough trouble already.
Well, thank you very much, Marcus, for coming on, and we look forward to keeping in touch. And anytime that you want to come back and talk about a project or movies in general, you know that there's two crazy film buffs over here that will talk your ear off.
Anytime. Check out Exeter; you will like it. We had a great time doing it. It's a fun movie.
I'll see Exeter as soon as it comes into theaters.
Yeah,
as soon as it comes into theaters,
available.
I'll check it out. Right.
You guys take it easy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Take care.